Who do you trust? Do you trust the news? Do you trust me? Should you trust either of those things? Well, I hope you trust me. I'm Tom Webster with Sounds Profitable, and this is Data Decoded for this week. And this week, I want to talk about the news. A study came out just a couple of weeks ago from one of the UK's most significant media companies, Global, about news podcasts and news podcasting. And before I show you this data, it was taken from their own internal panel of podcast listeners, all of whom listen to news podcasts. So this is taken from 600 news podcast listeners, not the general population. So keep that in mind. This is not how the public feels. It's how people who already listen feel. But these news podcast listeners were asked to think about a variety of sources of news, everything from social media to radio to podcast. And they were asked a number of different attributes about why they might listen to those various media for the news and how best each of these attributes describes the reasons why they listen to the news. And they're all plotted here on this slide in something that we data wonks call a radar chart or spider graph. And essentially, the larger the circle, the stronger the attribute is. Podcasting here is in the lower left in that big blue circle. So it finishes first, as it were, in many different attributes. And you can see they all are of a piece, right? When I'm looking for expert opinions, when I'm looking to go deeper, when I want to gain a more in-depth understanding. And in contrast to that, if you look at the top right of this, at where podcasting underperforms some other media, some of these are attributes that are related to breaking news, a quick check on the headlines, get the latest updates. Breaking news is not an attribute that podcasting is really strong in right now. But honestly, that's a factor of technology, I think, as much as perception. And I think that's probably going to change. So right now, as it were, news from other sources like social media, television, and so on are for when you want to know now, while podcasts are used for when you want to know more. Like I said, that's not necessarily prescriptive, but it's certainly descriptive. One other thing I wanted to point out on this graph, though, at about 2 o'clock, if you tell time the way that I do, and that is to verify a news item or piece of information. And in that, even social media outperforms podcasting, which is bazonkers, frankly. But I think that's an element of trust. And that is what I wanted to talk about with the second piece of data. And this is a piece of data from the cutting room floor here at Sounds Profitable. Actually, grabbed this from our most recent survey that we did in Q4 of 2022, Safe and Sound, which was a study on brand safety and suitability. But we also asked some questions about news, because brand suitability and the news is something that comes up a lot with our partners. And one of the questions that we asked was, how much do you trust each of these various sources of news on a scale of 1 to 5? And the percentages that you see here are the 4s and 5s, basically. One thing you will not see on this graph is television. I want to explain that very quickly. Television is bazonkers. It's all over the map. So we disintermediated it into the various networks, everything from MSNBC and CNN to Fox and OAN and everything in between, because the aggregate does not make a lot of sense here for television. So let's set that aside. But if you look at what people trust, or what most people trust, more people trust printed newspapers. 49% give that a 4 or 5. But podcasting is right in that second group, right? It's statistically nearly tied with top results from Google and AM/FM radio. And that despite the fact that podcasts are really less than 20 years old, and certainly a lot younger than that in terms of being a news as we know it, news source. So podcasting has already come a long way in less than 20 years. But where you really see the story is demographically. With podcasting, you see it's very strong, 18 to 34. It's exceptionally strong, 35 to 54. In fact, it's second in trust to printed newspapers, and only 2 percentage points behind it. And it's only in 55 plus where you see it really drop down to 27%. But a lot of things drop down to 27% because 55 plus in this country, they don't trust a lot. They don't trust you either. And I assume that when I hit that magical demographic with some clean living, I'll stop trusting everything as well. But currently, I do trust some things. But my point here is that 18 to 54 podcasts have a lot of trust for the news. And I think a lot of those perceptions for news podcasts, even news podcasts as a source of breaking news, as something to stay up to date, are all perceptions that can change both as 55 plus starts to get turned on to news podcasts, as the technology catches up with the assembly of breaking news style podcasts. And of course, people in that 35 to 54-year-old demographic, like myself, with some clean living, will age into being 55 and retain that trust of podcasts. So I think the future is bright for news podcasts. I think there are ways to explore the news in podcasting that we have really yet to fully flesh out, and better days are ahead. I'm Tom Webster. Thanks so much for spending a little bit of time with me here on Data Decoded. For more, check out soundsprofitable.com, and I'll see you next week.